Thank you ever so much, Simran. That's really great. So it's really my pleasure to be here. I've been excited to see developments at Staffordshire and wonderful webinars and things, and very honored to be invited to give this talk to you today. It's really a workshop. It's going to be very interactive. So I've been working with active learning for many years, and I've come to conclude that active learning is when students carry out an active cognitive task of some form. So what is an active cognitive task? This definition that I'm going to give you is based on an article, chapter I wrote for a CETA Focus book that came out in February about active cognitive tasks, synthesizing frameworks for active learning online. And actually, I need to adjust that. They changed the subtitle of the book between the time I right. So I'll correct that for you. It's about theoretical perspectives. But anyway, it came out just a few months ago, and I'm really honored to have contributed to that. So what makes it active? So it's active, not passive. So the student has to engage with the task. And in order for this to happen, the students must own the learning process. And for that to happen, we have to build an environment where students can have mutual trust among students and between the teachers and students, and give our students agency. And that can feel a little bit threatening, or if we're not used to doing that, it can be a bit scary. I'll be honest with you, but it's really valuable to do that. So that's what makes the task active. So what makes it cognitive? This goes back to that early definition of active learning from Baumwell and Asen, that they're not just doing something, but thinking about what they're doing. But what kind of thinking are we talking about? So one example is constructing mental schemas by reinforcing connections. Another example could be putting the information into meaningful long-term memory. So when the task is cognitive, the student is doing mental work, and that can feel difficult. And sometimes students resist that and say, oh, just tell me the answers. I don't want to solve a problem. But actually, that type of effortful learning or desirable difficulty is valuable, because then the students really learn it and they can use that new information in the future. So that's what we're aiming for, not just box ticking. We want that meaningful learning to take place. So that's the cognitive side. And then again, the task means the students have to do something. They're not just hoping to absorb all the information you're giving them. They're not just carrying out that laboratory practical step by step, following instructions. You know, they have to do something that's substantive. So it's not the content that we're teaching them, but what students do with that content. That's what matters. So that's what makes it an active cognitive task. So I'm going to go through the models that I used in coming up with this definition. And these are ways we can tell how active, how cognitive, how much of a task is it, and where we can go to look for ideas. So the active side, I really like the ICAP model for active learning, which has interactive, constructive, and active dimensions. I'll explain that in a bit more detail. That is a way for us as educators to evaluate how active is the thing we're designing, the learning activity. The next one, how cognitive is it? I'm old school in some ways. I love Bloom's taxonomy. And so higher order thinking is a really nice structure for us to decide how cognitive is our task. Are students creating, evaluating, analyzing, or applying? These are the 4 categories from Bloom's taxonomy that I feel can be considered as higher ordered thinking. Some people who only take the top 3, but I think application also fits. And then where do we go to get ideas for tasks? There are loads of different models. I really like the ABC learning design model, which has 6 types of learning, so that one task might incorporate more than one of these types of learning. But there are other models that are equally as good. So I will talk about each of these in turn. So I'm going to start with the ABC learning design types of learning. So there are 6 of these. and they're meant to be used in a balance. So acquisition, if you don't use it in combination with any of the other ones, maybe acquisition could be passive, not active. But if you use it in combination, it will be active. So acquisition is where the students are taking in information, reading, attending lectures, watching a video, that kind of thing. But they're doing, to use this model appropriately, you would need to combine acquisition with something else. All of the other 5 are active by definition. There's no way they could not be active. So the next one going around the circle is collaboration, where students are working together. Oh, there goes Arthur. Students are working together towards a common goal. So they're not just talking to each other. Discussion, they're talking to each other. Collaboration, they're talking to each other or working together to do something. So, you know, discussion might be think, pair, share, you know, it's something you might do in the classroom. But collaboration's where they're doing that for a purpose, a shared purpose. The next one around the circle is investigation. And this is where students are finding out more information. It could be doing an experiment. It could be doing field work. It could be writing poetry. We were hearing about poetry earlier. I was sitting in on the prior session. Fantastic, Nick Pairing. Whatever it might be, they are finding out more information. They're going out and doing something. Then practice is a really nice one where you can break down what you want students to accomplish by the end of the module, for example, into smaller component parts. So it could be practicing a skill like pipetting in a laboratory. It could be practicing writing rhymed couplets, you know, so it's one part of what they're meant to do, and they get a chance to practice it multiple times with feedback, and then they use it in earnest in their summative assessment at the end. So it gives them a safe space to do that practicing. And then the final one in here is production. So this is where students are making something. It could be an essay, it could be a report, it could be a poster, it could be a performance, it could be a clay pot, whatever it is, the students are making something. So in your learning, to use this ABC learning design, you would decide what kind of balance you want among the 6. So it helps you to think outside of perhaps the default position of, well, I want them to come to lecture, do some readings, and write a report. So that would be some of these, but not all of them. So maybe you want to do a lot of acquisition, but also a lot of production and some discussion, investigation. Maybe you want them to do loads of collaboration, loads of practice, and, you know, maybe a little bit less of production, or whatever a combination that might be. So there's no one-size-fits-all answer for this. You would evaluate your own teaching context and decide what balance among the 6 is useful. But I think this design approach helps us to think outside of our normal default go-to positions and say, okay, is there a way for students to collaborate? Is there a way for them to investigate on their own? And then it gives you the appropriate balance. So that's where you can look. I like this model for thinking about what kind of task I want to design. So in terms of making it cognitive, again, Bloom's taxonomy, I'm sure all of you know that. This is the original version of the taxonomy, which is using nouns. And if you haven't been working with this lately, it might be useful to remind yourself that the higher levels build on the lower levels. So you're not just doing the higher levels, you're doing all the ones below it. Here's the revised Bloom's taxonomy, where they turned the nouns into verbs and they swapped around the top 2. I would argue that the 4 on the top are all active. They're all higher orders of thinking. So students should create something, evaluate data, evaluate an argument. Students should analyze some, you know, whatever it would be that's appropriate for you. Maybe all you want to do is application. That's fine. That's still, in my opinion, that goes to higher order thinking. Yes, they need to remember the facts. Yes, they need to understand those concepts. But what do they do with those concepts? They're applying them, analyzing, evaluating. So that's how I would use Bloom's taxonomy to decide how cognitive is my task. And if you find, sometimes we design things for students to do, but it doesn't really address very many of these, or doesn't go very high on that ladder. So anyway, that was one of my light bulb moments in my own personal development as an educator. So the next model is about how active it is. And again, I like to use this one. ICAP was designed by Micheline Chi, and she is a leader of a team of cognitive scientists. And she broke down active learning into 3 categories based on the cognitive processes for them. And the research, evidence-based research, has found that the interactive style tends to have the most learning gains, the best retention of the knowledge, the best scores on their final summative assessments. So wherever possible, it's not always going to be possible, but wherever possible, if we can move towards interactive, it's great. So interactive, according to Chi's definition, to make that really interactive, it's not just each student in the group contributes their part, but they're interacting with each other, they're responding to each other, and also this includes interacting and responding to the teacher. So they're creating while incorporating their partners' contributions, responding to each other's partners, their contributions. And in one of the micro case studies in the previous hour, there was a really wonderful one where ChatGPT was one of the members of the group. I love that. We'll have another conversation on that later. So that's the interactive column. If students are not working in groups, sometimes it's not appropriate, or you've got students with, in your class, depending on how you're teaching, what the module is like, you might just be having students work on their own. That's perfectly fine. So that would be in the constructive column. So this is where students are producing output beyond the given information. They're not just giving you back what you've told them in lecture, what you've given them to read in the assigned reading, but they are finding something out. So they're integrating the new knowledge with their existing knowledge. That's building the mental schemas, as on the previous slide. So that's constructive, and that's fantastic. The category that Chi describes as active is more on the behavioral side, a little bit more superficial. So students might be doing something physical. They might be activating their existing knowledge and storing new information, but they're not necessarily working towards building those mental schemas. So they're engaging with the learning, and that would be like a baseline level that we would expect. The passive learning, that's the P of the ICAP. That's just, we give them information. We hope they remember it. We hope they can use it. There's not very much going on in the cognitive processes with the passive learning. So the other 3 are all different subcategories within active learning in this model. So I like that if I'm looking at something that's maybe in the active column, I think, okay, is there scope for making it more constructive? Is there scope for making it more interactive? So that's what I do as a learning designer or as an educator designing things for my own students. So once I had that, I discovered that a lot of these categories have an overlap with the online engagement framework for HE by Redmond and her team. So this is not exactly about active learning, but actually their idea of student engagement supports active learning. So you can see the cognitive, behavioral, collaborative coming into it, the social, and then the emotional has to do with the motivation. So that's a very brief overview of active cognitive tasks and the things I considered in putting this definition together. My key message for everybody is to try to have your students do some kind of active cognitive task, not just passively absorb the information. Yes, we need to give them information. Yes, we want them to remember it, but we want them to do more than just recall and regurgitate what we've told them. So the rest of this hour is going to be interactive. Surprise, surprise. And we are going to use a shared document. I'm going to first collect your real teaching scenarios. And if you are joining via Teams, I've put the link in the Teams chat to the shared document. If you are joining in the room, there's a QR code. I'll leave that on the screen. Thank you very much, Simran, for creating that this morning and making sure that everybody can edit this document. So first we'll collect your scenarios, and then we will choose one or more and develop ideas for acts together. And looking at the people in the room, I think we will work as one big group, but I will take on board what Simran and Anshul have to say about this. If you think there's too many people to work as one group, we can split it into smaller groups. So that's perfectly fine. So If everybody's got the QR code, then I will stop sharing this screen. And I'm going to just give me a moment to swap between one thing and another. I'm going to close that, and I'm going to share the shared document, which is here. So I put a little cheat sheet in there at the top. Active cognitive task, that's the same text as in the slide I showed you a moment ago. What do we mean by active, cognitive, and task? And the first thing I'd like you to do is to go in, pick a row, put your cursor in there, type in your teaching scenario. What is the topic? I might shift these boundaries. What is the learning outcome for that session? What do you want students to be able to do after having had that teaching session? And maybe how you think you might like to make it more active. So let everybody pick a row and type in there. If you want to work as a team, people sitting at your table and do one together, that's perfectly fine. One person can type in, and I'll give you 2 or 3 minutes to type in your scenarios. Then we will pick 1 or 2, and we'll workshop those collectively. I'll turn my webcam off so I can look at my big screen. And these are all anonymous. We've got anonymous Rhino typing. I really love this. So everybody go ahead, click into the box, type your contributions, and then we will choose from the various scenarios. We got animals today. That fits with what the previous session was about. So the learning outcome doesn't have to be the official module learning outcome or the course learning outcome. It can simply be, what do you want students to be able to do after this session? And I like that one of them, number 2, is about, looks like it's about training staff. If you work with training other staff, that's perfectly fine. That's a great scenario for your teaching scenario. So they don't have to be undergrads or postgrads. Yeah, some great topics here. Oh, David. Hi, David. Sorry. No, one of those wasn't anonymous. Nice to see you. In person, maybe next time. We met many years ago. I won't say how many, at a Blackboard conference. Oh, bless. I think next year I'll be going to conferences in person again. Okay, we got any more topics to come in? We've got 4 so far. I thought there might be a few more since we have a fair number of people here. If we can get maybe 1 or 2 more, and then we'll choose which one to work with. I don't know how many are joining us online. Okay. All right. I think we're pretty close. I see a couple of cursors in 5 and 6, but no one's typed into those yet. So if you would like to add another one, go ahead and add one. Otherwise, we'll start the voting process. And I'm going to ask Simran if you wouldn't mind terribly helping to collect the votes, because I don't know if we want to use the chat in Teams, because the people in the room wouldn't be able to type in. Kind of doing this sort of very generally. Mass lecture, 45 minutes to inform students of visual exploration. Yes. This kind of thing, we're often given that kind of scenario. And how do we teach that other than with, transmission style, purely passive learning? It's really hard. It's really hard. We have to be creative. Yep. Okay. I think we've got 6 options here. What I'd like for people to do, I think the easiest way to vote is to go in where it says where the numbers are. I'm going to put mine. I'm going to say a Y, and just put a Y next to the one that you would like to discuss in that column. And we'll see which one gets the most Ys, and that's the one we'll start with. And then if we have time, we'll do a second one. So we've got discover how the UN Sustainable Goals affect their lives as a student, developing student personas for successful course design, cross-course one-day learning activity. Don't know what ideas generation. I'm not quite sure what the topic is. It sounds like a description of an activity. Feel free to add in. Understand how to use AI effectively for teaching and learning. Demonstrate to students, this is kind of similar kind of one, how to best use AI in their practice. And then a mass lecture, 45 minutes to inform students on visual exploration. So which one would you guys like to start with? Put a Y next to your choices where the numbers are, and then we'll see which one has most Ys. Or if somebody doesn't have a device and would like to maybe tell Simran or myself, I can put in a Y on your behalf. Yeah. We've got 1 vote for 6. I know we've got more than 6 people. 1 vote for 4. We had 2 people put something in there about AI as their scenario. Shall we start with 4? Are we ready to? We've got 2 votes for 6. 4 and 5 are quite similar. So shall we? Should I pick 6? This is a challenging one. And then we will try to come back to 4. So here's what I want to do, and see if I'm going to copy and paste going to work this as desired. It does. So here's your scenario. You've got a mass lecture, loads of students, 45 minutes to inform them about visual exploration. I'm not sure what visual exploration means in this context, but it has to do with Gestalt theory. I think that's quite nice. And then what you'd like to do is use student mobile technology to include students in the task. That's a great aim. So what I'd like for you to do, we're going to do the same thing, collaborative writing. I'm going to ask you, each person pick a row in the table below. So if I click my cursor in there, that's where I would do something. And describe how you would design an active cognitive task to support this topic, Gestalt theory and visual exploration, and using mobile technology if you can. And then I'd like you to map it against the three models. So the ICAP, I, C, or A, interactive, constructive, or active, the top 4 categories on Bloom's, and the 6 types of learning from the ABC learning design. And I've got a little cheat sheet here at the top of the scenario to help you remember those categories. So just put the letter that corresponds to the categories that apply. So I'm going to give you maybe 2 or 3 minutes to help this person design their active cognitive task. And then we'll talk about it, and then we'll do another one if we have time. Put your own ones in there. I want you guys to put your own ones in the boxes. And the person who contributed this, say a little bit more about visual exploration, either if you're in the room using the microphone, or if you're online, just unmute your mic and speak and explain what you mean by that in some more detail.
Hi, Mary.
Hello, who is that?
Hi, my name's Sam, but we didn't realise that you couldn't hear us, and we were just talking.
Oh no, I can hear you now. Thank you. What is your context for this? Because I'm sort of guessing, but I'm not sure. What do you teach? Oh, I can't hear you again. I can't hear you. Less. The sound isn't coming through still. It did for a moment. Oh, we've got a bit of an issue because I can't hear any sound. Simran, are you able to type into the form? Oh.
Hello?
Yes, I can hear you now.
Okay. Great. I think it might be like moving too far away from it, perhaps. Try again.
Oh, there's an echo. Yes. I'm going to turn my mic off.
Hello?
Okay, I see some great ideas coming into the forum. So I will speak to some of those ideas you are already putting in there. So this seems to be something in an arts program. I wasn't sure about that visual exploration, what that really referred to. So movement around the room may benefit, alluding to interactive. So I'm not sure how that is. Are there pictures in different places in the room and you want students to move from one to another and then they can talk to the person? Is it like a poster session type of thing? And I'll let you type rather than turning the mic on because that way we can avoid the feedback. Actually, I'm going to put my question in there. Yep. There we go. Great. I want to be in that module. Can I be in your module, please? I love the arts, and I would love to do this analysis and moving around the room. There's something really powerful about students getting up and physically moving, and I think that's why the A in the ICAP model applies. So how I would invite you, whoever is in the document, to see if you can identify interactive, constructive, active for ICAP. Which ones of those apply? What's the highest level on Bloom's taxonomy among the four? Create, evaluate, analyze, apply, which is the highest one there? And how many different types of learning from the ABC learning design would apply in this task? So we're keeping in mind the learning outcome is that they're applying Gestalt theory to visual exploration. So what are they meant to do with that Gestalt theory? They're applying it. What are they doing to that with that Gestalt idea?
Right. So we can communicate with you, but we'll have to kind of go back and forth as we'll have a bit of an echo. So we'll kind of have to talk in the room, then hear Mary's response. I know it's not the ideal situation. We've just had to quickly pivot because we've changed from being in person to online at the last minute. So what I'll do is I can pass, you guys can talk, then we can hear Mary's response, and we'll just have to flip like that if that's okay. Yeah, basically.
Hopefully you can hear me now. If you can nod, Mary, that's fantastic. We have been engaging in the task separately, but we obviously want your feedback as well. But ultimately, what we posed was we are visual communication tutors, and we're very studio based in terms of our teaching methods. But once a week, we get the illustration and graphic students, which are cross-course students, so 2 different degrees, together in a lecture room and talk at them for 45 minutes about a number of different subjects. One of it, which could be Gestalt psychology theory in relation to what you see, and so which could be a wildlife fund with the panda as an example, and using visual communication to sell an idea. But it could be marketing communications and how that's relevant to a graphic design student. So it's a lecture. And it's probably a little bit unfamiliar territory to us as tutors to stand in front of a group of 50 students and impart to what they might think is not hugely relevant, and how do they, as visual learners, then accommodate that passive information and engage in it, as opposed to just walking out the classroom and probably forgetting what they've just learned. That helps.
Yes, can I switch back to me? That's a great idea. So I love that. So what I'm hearing is that you want the students to be able to apply Gestalt theory to analyze a graphic design and maybe evaluate it. Is that right? Am I reading that right?
Yes. Yes.
So how to make this better, and how would you, and maybe express verbally how they would apply that Gestalt theory to what they're seeing. And I'm also hearing that you had have a challenge from your students who might be strongly thinking in visual terms and not that strong in their verbal expression. Is that right? I think
yes.
we see that in different disciplines too. So if they're all in the same room, I like the idea of running it like a poster session where they put their things up, or they're on tables around the room or stuck to the wall, and people circulate around and talk to the person who's made that thing. So if you had half of them on, half of the students standing by their posters, and then the other half were circulating and talking to them, and then they swap, and the other half stand by their works, and the first half of the students come around and talk to them, you would have a very loud room. But I think you would have a lot of energy with that, and you have the benefit of the physical moving, which I think is a real positive.
So that is using the discussion aspect, I think, in terms of one of your learning strategies. That might be getting mixed up with what we've just done. So using discussion collaboratively peer-based activity.
Yes.
Yeah, we could, instead of talking to them for 45 minutes, we could separate them into groups, perhaps. It's not for the Gestalt example, it might be a series of 5 posters. I suppose we could get them to put post-its up, or words that they've learned from our session to that piece of work. So it's not too noisy with 50 students. And
I love that plan. And I think that if you were to start, I mean, I confess I did make a little contribution down here. The principle of activating prior knowledge is often quite valuable for meaningful learning. So if we start off asking them very briefly, and you could do an online poll, or you could do it any way you wanted, what they already know about that Gestalt theory, and then maybe have like a 5-minute introduction to fill in the gaps. If some people didn't understand everything that you want them to understand, you could explain it to them, and then go into the poster session where they're all interacting, and the lecturer, the tutors can sort of wander among the students, listen in, keep a certain distance, but intervene, where, if they're missing something, you can intervene, but otherwise you sort of stand back just a little bit and overhear, eavesdrop a bit. That can be a really valuable technique. I love it. You guys, great. You guys came up with a great design.
Carl did something, that's what you suggested, wasn't it? Ask them in advance, why am I here? Or sorry, Neen suggested, why are we in here today? Because they would think that they are just rocking up because we're going to talk to them for an hour, but asking them to give kind of what they already think they are going to hear. So challenge, why is it applicable? Yeah, and then almost challenge them perhaps on their expectations, and then ask them in a formative way what they've actually learned that has challenged them. And even if they only take 2 things out of it or 3 things out of it, then our job is done to an extent.
Fab, you've done it. My goodness. Shall we pick another one? We had 2 different ones that had to do with AI. One is about using it for learning and teaching, and the other is about using it for future practice in medicine. Shall we pick one of those 2? Then there's this. Which one would you like?
Hi Mary, there's 5 minutes until the Q&A.
Rather than a Q&A, I would just like to start workshopping the next one. We don't have to complete it, but get people started thinking about another example, if that's okay. Unless people have questions that you want to ask, in which case we can do the Q&A now. It's up to you. Let me know what you think.
There aren't any questions at the moment, Mary, so I think we can continue.
Fantastic. So our next topic, oops, sorry, I grabbed the wrong text. Hold on a second, bear with me. Okay, so our next one is for medicine, how to best use AI in your future practice. Is a great question. So what would you design for an active cognitive task for that? And how does it relate to the 3 frameworks? So I will be quiet and you guys can talk. I'll turn my mic off.